Hello. We have Kara with us. Kara, I'm gonna let you introduce yourself.
Hi, my name's Kara Spike. I'm 46 years old and I have cyclic vomiting.
And Kara, how long have you had cyclic vomiting syndrome?
I started at the age of 5. I was on a long car trip to visit my grandparents in Illinois and got sick on the car ride. It was like an 11-hour car ride and they couldn't get it to stop. I was in Illinois for a really, I don't know, 3 or 4 days. And my parents ended up putting me on an airplane with my mom and flying us home. And I was admitted into the hospital with dehydration.
And so that was your first episode.
The very first episode. Yep.
But I'm guessing at that time they didn't know you had cyclic vomiting syndrome.
Right.
So how long from then until you were diagnosed, if you remember?
At the age of 9, my parents had taken me to who was kind of had done some papers regarding cyclic vomiting. There had been some talk of that diagnosis. And so we went there and he actually did diagnose me at the age of 9. Subsequently, they also put me in a locked child psychiatric unit because they thought maybe there was some sort of um, mental thing along with it, whether it be an eating disorder or myself making myself sick. I was in a locked child psychiatric unit at the age of 9 for 6 months.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's incredible. And so during that time, do you remember, were your parents constantly fighting to get you out? Or you don't remember?
They were just, they're at the Mayo Clinic and they're like, well, they should know what they're doing. They just kind of, followed like, okay, well, let's try it because we haven't done this before. Um, but they started realizing that I was getting sick while I was there. And so they were kind of treating it like an eating disorder where I had to eat so many bites of food. And then they'd put me in another room where they watched me for an hour and a half after I ate to make sure I didn't throw up. And sometimes I was totally fine and I ate just like everybody else. And then when I was in an episode, um, obviously when you're nauseated and sick and they're making you eat so many bites, you're not going to keep it down. So I would throw up or I'd have that just awful, awful nausea where they would see me like chug cold milk because it was the only thing that I know when the food came back up, it would help coat my esophagus and it was constantly burning from vomiting. So they saw that as, some sort of an eating disorder, maybe like a bulimic where they, stuff their mouth with food or whatever. Um, and so they were just using that as, she's got issues. And so my parents were realizing that once I was in there for a few months, they were starting to look for a medical diagnosis. And my parents were like, that's not what she's here for. And they actually wanted to send me to, I guess, which is in Kansas. And my parents were like, there's no way. And so after 6 months, they took me out and they put me in to get further treatment.
Wow, that's quite a story. And I mean, I feel like at that age could be a little bit traumatizing to you as far as just being put there and not really maybe understanding why you're there.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm pretty sure I probably have some PTSD from all of it. Um, but I was a pretty resilient kid and it just, I was in with the other kids that were in this locked unit were I was definitely the youngest one, but most of them were the age of like 13 to 17 with anorexia or bulimia or other mental health issues, of which I, didn't know at the age of 9. But everybody there, the kids kind of took me under their wing, and I was like the little sister, and they watched out for me. And um, yeah, it was definitely a different experience. I went to school there. They had tutors that would tutor me, and um, but it was pretty awful. I mean, I think I maybe saw my parents 4 times in 6 months. or any of
Okay.
my family. Yeah.
Wow. That's pretty intense. And do you remember when you were there? So when you would start vomiting, would they try to treat you at all, or they just thought they still believed you were trying to make yourself throw up?
After I had been there, a couple months, they would see that I'd get that histamine rash. So I remember vividly that they were taking skin samples of the rash while it was happening. Um, I know that they were doing endoscopies. I remember having to drink barium at one time when I was there. So after I had been in there for a couple months, they started looking for medical reasons. And of course, they never found anything. And but they had writings of it, back with Samuel G back in the 1800s. But wasn't anything back there how to treat it. So I'm not sure how they made the leap from making the diagnosis of cyclic vomiting to put me in this unit. I don't know what the leap was because it doesn't make sense to me now,
Mm-hmm.
but that's just the way it was. So then, if we back up before I started out as 5-year-old, and then I got 2 episodes in 1 year. And then the next year when I was 7, I maybe had 3 or 4 episodes. And I would always get so dehydrated that I'd need an IV fluids. But I was treated so poorly because they thought I wanted the attention. And so my parents would bring me to the clinic. They would never admit me. They would give me IV fluids in the clinic for, however long the day was. They'd take the IV out and they'd send me home. Well, every time, because they didn't want to leave the IV in, because why make it easy? Let's start another IV because maybe that'll keep you from wanting to come back. So every day I had IVs inserted, fluids taken out, went home. And so after this was happening for a while, my parents, they were in something called an HMO. And the doctors down here were labeling it as it was psychological because they had done every test under the sun. It had always come back normal. What else could it be? It's got to be psychological. So to get out of that, that's why my parents wanted to take me to get a whole different set of eyes, get away from everything, labeling me psychological. But of course, when you transfer from one place to the other, your records follow you. So even though I was diagnosed with cyclic vomiting, and then they put me in this unit, and then they took me out, put me at, the doctors there were like, okay, yeah, you do have cyclical vomiting. That's not a diagnosis. It's just what you do. So even though I had the diagnosis, nobody acknowledged it because there wasn't any treatment protocols or any understanding of really what it was.
Wow, that's so interesting. So much has changed for the better since that time, which is good. And so how long usually were your episodes? You were just describing about going back to the hospital multiple days to get those fluids. So how many days usually was a typical episode for you? Do you
That
remember?
was just going back every day for IVs. That was actually done in a clinic. They wouldn't admit me because they thought it would give me too much. They thought that I wanted it for attention. So I would just go to the clinic
Okay.
after. So then it seemed like the worse I was treated, the more maybe anxiety it caused me because I didn't want to go there. But because of that, then that just perpetuated the episodes happen more frequently.
Mm-hmm.
So initially, that when I was 5, it lasted 4 or 5 days. And typically in the beginning, it lasted about a week. Um, I would throw up anywhere from initially from 25 to 30 times in 24 hours to about 15 times a day. And then I would gradually kind of go down until then I stopped. And when I was young, I could just, a flip of a switch, like McDonald's fries, and be totally fine. And then it was like a light switch, my parents would say. Somebody flipped the switch, and I was totally back to myself. And so by the time I was 9 years old, and in that locked unit, in that 6 month period of time, I was probably sick 4 months of that time.
Wow.
And then I came home right before Christmas 1984. And then I was in probably for another 3 months because I would have, an ongoing episode and maybe have 1 or 2 good days. And then I would flip back into an episode again. So I never had enough days to string together for nutrition. So eventually I had a central line put in and I had TPN and lipids. And I was being fed that way for months at a time. And eventually my dad was just so tired of, everybody, coming up with their own conclusions about why I was getting sick, because everything came back normal. The only thing that would bring my nausea any solace was my dad or my mom or whoever rubbed my back. It was the only thing that would calm me down. It would help the nausea go away. It would help me go to sleep. And so they saw my dad doing this, and one time accused my dad of molestation, which is ridiculous. So yeah, it's after you've been around the clinics and the hospitals for so long and then pointing fingers at you for so long, he's like, screw this, I'm going to learn how to do it. So we got signed up with home care. My dad learned how to take care of my central line and would give me, the TPN and lipids at home, and waited the hospital day. So every time I'd have an episode, he could manage it at home, and it was good. Good, but better than the hospital. So to answer your question, they increasingly got longer and longer. So the episodes were anywhere from 3 to 6 months at a time, with a handful of good days in there at its worst.
Yeah. Wow. That sounds miserable, but I'm glad they finally let your dad, step in there and do that, because I'm sure that probably was less anxiety producing, being able to have your dad do it at home than having to go in to the clinic. One of my interviews brought up the word medical trauma, and I hadn't really thought about that much, but I mean, my goodness, I don't know too many CVS patients that don't probably have medical trauma, that don't want to go to hospitals or go to doctors because of their experiences that they've had. Do you remember a point in time where something that was done for you by a doctor, where the CVS started getting better, or that they found a treatment plan that worked for you?
I was 17. So I'm trying to think how we got to this guy. Was my pediatrician at the time, and she has written a chapter in a book about me, about taking care of me, and all of the misconceptions about me through nurses taking care of me, through doctors taking care of me, and them not being able to come up with any good plan because they didn't know what to do. She pointed us in the direction of, he was a child psychologist, surprisingly, by the name of, and so, of course, when they send you to these people and they want you to talk about your illness and, oh, how do you feel? And how does this make you feel? And when you feel good, you don't want about it. So he was a very sarcastic man, and I enjoyed the banter back and forth, and we had a really good relationship, so much so that he came to my wedding like 10 years later. But he thought, you know what, he knew of the history of migraines in my family, and he knew that there was a correlation in his reading that he had done with cyclic vomiting of some sort of a migraine correlation. He thought, you know what, let's just try nortriptyline and see what that does. So he put me on it. It was a lower dose, and I was still having episodes through these lower doses. So he said, let's just take your blood levels. You can take your blood levels of nortriptyline and make sure that it is in a therapeutic blood level in your system, and then see what happens. So every month he would gradually increase the nortriptyline level until I got up to 150 milligrams, which is the highest dose you can be on before having to monitor your heart. And he was so surprised, but it took 150 milligrams for my blood level to become therapeutic in my body. And as soon as that happened, my episode stopped at 17 years old. They tried to take me off because I was playing soccer in high school, and it wasn't allowing my heart rate to speed up when I would run, and so I'd get lightheaded, and so we tried to switch to Zoloft. And when he did that, episodes started coming back again. So he put me back on the nortriptyline, back on 150 milligrams, and I've been on it ever since. I will never let anyone take me off of that. I don't care if it shortens my life in some manner. I'm on it for life.
Yeah. Well, and if it's therapeutic and it works, that's what's important. Did you so have you never had an episode since you've been on it, or it's just been less severe, less frequent, not quite the same symptoms?
I know my triggers. Just being in tune with my body and looking back, and my mom and dad helping me find those things. Being overtired was one of my most common trigger, whether it be when I was little and in elementary school having sleepovers and staying up late. The next morning I would for sure be in an episode. So that is still one of my triggers. At the age of 13, 11, 12, 13, when I was getting my period, they were noticing every month I was have an episode right when my period or right before my period started. They had put me on birth control pill at the age of 12 or 13. That actually slowed the episodes down and they weren't occurring as frequently. So being overtired, my period, and then any heightened anxiety or excitement going on trips, birthday parties, sleepovers, anything that I would look forward to going to was always a trigger for me. And then I'm just trying to think if there was anything else, but that was, I mean, I missed out on countless birthdays and Christmases and trips. To Florida one time when I was 8 years old with my family. We went to where I'm on because I was sick in the hotel room the entire time. So now, as an adult, there were times between 17 and now where I knew that if I wasn't on it, I felt like it was something was holding me back to keep me back from flipping into an episode. But I always knew that those situations, mostly high anxiety times, my dad had emergency bypass surgery, my wedding, anything like that, I always just made sure I got extra sleep, more sleep than normal. I'd take some Benadryl to help me to sleep if I couldn't. So there's different things that I'd managed through it. So I haven't had a vomiting episode since 17. But now at the age of 45, last year, I started getting migraines with my periods. So it's coming back to haunt me, but I'd much rather have these migraines that I could go into a full-blown episode that could last weeks. I'm so grateful that I had it as a child, because I can't imagine trying to be an adult and have to manage a job and make a living so that I could live. I can't imagine adding that stress on top of.
Yeah, for sure. My heart always goes out to people that have it as adults, because just what you said, I mean, trying to manage working and having cyclic vomiting syndrome has got to be very tough. What would you like people who don't understand CVS to know about living with CVS?
I'm a nurse now, so I kind of understand both sides of the coin. I think it would be helpful if people were less judgmental because they don't know what it is. They don't know anything about it. And by saying, you know, if you just did this, or if you just did that, or have you tried this, or have you tried that? Believe me, we've tried it all. And we just need some understanding and some grace and some patience to get through it. Because anytime when people are throwing accusations or accusing you, or it just makes the symptoms that much worse. It doesn't help in any way. Just be there for them. You don't have to do anything. My dad would come and just there, and that was offered so much comfort.
Yeah, I'm sure. Do you feel like your experience with having CVS is part of why you became a nurse?
Oh, 100%. Absolutely. I had some really bad nurses. And I had some really good nurses for sure. And when I was 12 years old, I was at the time they had a four bed rooms. So in one room, there would be 4 children. And I had been in the hospital, probably about a month, maybe 6 weeks, when I got a roommate in that 4-bed room. So it was the 2 of us. And we were both 12 years old. And she came in because she had lumps in her groin, is how I understood it when I was 12. And she ended up being diagnosed with lymphoma, because every time I was admitted, they knew that what I had wasn't contagious. So they always put me on the cancer floor. So all my friends were bald and had cancer. And we just created this bond. You know, she would be up during the night throwing up from her chemo, and I'd be helping her in her bed and hold her hair. And then I think about it and I cry. She would come over and do the same for me. And we were in the hospital. So she came in August. And the end of November, my parents ended up taking me out. And they moved her into a different room. I didn't understand the reason why, but she was dying. And so I gave her a hug before I left, and I said, I'm going to do something to help the cancer people someday. And she died. And so it's the only thing I've ever wanted to do. And I'm an oncology nurse today in her honor. Her family had found me through Facebook. Oh gosh, probably about 5 years ago. And so she had a younger sister, and we got in contact, and we've been talking, and she invited me to her wedding and her birthday, and I got to see her family again after, gosh, 30 years. So yeah, it's definitely the reason why I became a nurse. And I've actually found in the 24 years was working at the hospital, I helped diagnose 3 patients and became an advocate for them when doctors kept pushing me away and, oh, that's a childhood disorder. That's not an adult disorder. So I did a lot of education with those doctors and said, no, you know what? Anybody can get it. It's just not a kid disorder. So if I haven't done anything, I've helped 3 people get a diagnosis.
Yeah, that's amazing. You got me crying too. It's an awesome story. It's really great. Thank you for being a nurse. I know it's not an easy job, no matter what kind of nursing you do, for sure. Oh, okay. What would you tell someone new to their CVS journey? Either maybe they've just been diagnosed or they think they have CVS, but maybe don't have the diagnosis yet.
What would I tell them? Oh my gosh. So many things and maybe not so many things. I think I tend to have more of a horror story than a good story in the realm of people with cyclic vomiting. So I don't know if I necessarily want to share what I've been through, but hopefully through things that have gone since 1993 in the beginning of Cyclic Vomiting Syndrome Association. Um, I guess it's a really dark place to be when you've been sick for so long and not knowing if there's going to be an end in sight, because if you have to live that way, it's not worth living. I mean, at 13 years old, I felt that way. If this was the way I was going to live my life, I'm not sure I would have continued much past 13 unless things had gotten better. But I guess what I want them to know is that there is a light at the end of the tunnel. You just have to be persistent and find somebody that believes you and that is an advocate for you. And don't give up trying until you find that person. And yeah, it took me 12 years to find that person. And my life changed dramatically. I'm living life rather than just existing in it. Don't give up. And the same thing for parents. I don't know where I would have been without my parents being my advocate and not giving up and believing in me and not and knowing that I wasn't myself making myself sick. And as I think about being a kid and think about myself now as an adult and having kids, I can't imagine what my parents went through. I can't imagine.
Yeah, I'm sure the experience was horrific for them as it was for you. How did, I'm going to rephrase that. How did you come to find CVSA, and how were you involved with them once you found them?
It was 1993. I was in college. It was just when the dawn of email were coming about. Family friends of my parents somehow got word of Kathleen Adams in Wisconsin and gave Kathleen Adams my parents' phone number because she had Molly, her daughter, and she had found out that about us because we had never met anybody with cyclic vomiting syndrome. And my parents and Kathleen Adams spoke, and Kathleen Adams got my email address when I was up at school, and we started kind of emailing each other back and forth about different things and cyclic vomiting and about Molly, and Dr. Fleischer and Dr. Lee were on board with her. And there was 13 other families that had the same diagnosis or the same symptoms. And, you know, we were all just kind of, it was a breath of fresh air because we'd never heard of anybody else that had the same thing. And, you know, none of us in that time had ever met anybody with cyclic. So until that moment, I felt like I was the only one that had it. And so from there, we just became like this email chain. And then I don't know if it was 94 or 95 when we had the first symposium in Milwaukee with all the different doctors, and they had me speak as to my experience and to what happened with me. Doctor who had diagnosed me at the age of 9 was in the audience. Yeah, it was, and so that's how it came to be, 13 families, and one of them was in Ireland with Fiona. Mm-hmm. And we all got to meet, and it was, at that time, I was 19 years old and hadn't been sick for a couple years, so all of those emotions and those feelings and that anxiety kind of put you back in an episode, but, you know, not really. So it was difficult because I had kind of stuffed all of that and didn't want to talk about it, but I did get up and speak. And with my tears, you can see, I know I have PTSD from everything I've been through. So that was hard, but I was able to get out my story and help further what I went through and testing and what needed to be done, and to help others that have been just diagnosed or just, on the beginning paths of it.
Yeah, that's awesome. How did it feel when you first met someone else with cyclic vomiting syndrome?
It was validating because after you've been told, it's all in your head for so long, and you meet somebody else that has it too, and it's not just me, it's other people. I guess it's validating to know, because I think after you've been told for so long that this is what's causing it, you start to believe it yourself, and you think, maybe it is me. What am I doing to cause this? When in reality, it wasn't anything I was doing. Of course, you don't know that until you start meeting other people, and there's, other people have it. So it was validating, I guess you could say.
Yeah, definitely. What one word would you use to describe CVS?
Mhm. Um, I don't even know how to even begin to put that into words, even one word. Um, it's exhausting, absolutely exhausting. It's frustrating. Um, the amount of things that I missed out on in my childhood is sad. Um, yeah, but in the same respect, as I look back on it now, had I not gone through everything that I went through, going through this, I don't think I would be who I am or where I am today without having been through it. And as you're going through it, you don't fully understand that, but I fully feel like there was a higher purpose of me having to go through that to where I am today. And I guess I didn't realize that until after I've been through it. So even though it was as awful as it was, I wouldn't change it.
It's a very, very good point. I think a lot of people um, can feel that way about their experiences. Is there anything else? You've shared so much, Kara, and I'm so thankful to you for sharing and being so open and honest, because I know it's not easy. Is there anything else you want to share about your journey with CVS?
I mean, I think I've already kind of touched on it, but I just remember at the age of 13 being sick for the 18th gazillion time over Christmas, over the holidays, missing Halloween, missing my birthdays, that you just get so sunk. You just are depressed, and you just get in this hole where it's like, life is not worth living because I'm not living. And if this is the way life's going to be, I don't want to live it. I get those feelings. But if you persevere through it, you enjoy those good days that you have, there is going to be light at the end of the tunnel. Don't give up, because I missed out on my 3 children that I've had, my wedding, my parents, my friends, and able to enjoy life because you appreciate it so much more when you're actually living it. So you just give up.